Discussion 2, Policies and Regulations in Agriculture. We promise you a very stimulating and thought-provoking discussion. Please bear with us while we are getting the stage ready. We are honored to welcome on stage the esteemed panelists for this session. Please join me in welcoming Shri Siraj Hussain, former Secretary, Ministry of Food and Processing Industries and Agriculture, Government of India. A very warm welcome to the esteemed panelists for this session. May I request him please to join us on stage. We warmly welcome Ms. Shweta Saini, founder and CEO, Arcus Policy Research. Mr. Bimal Benghani, Director, Benghani Group. And Mr. Arvind Bettigeri, Regional Food Fortification Advisor, Asia and the Pacific, United Nations World Food Programme. And of course, a very warm welcome back to Mr. Deepak Parekh, our esteemed moderator for this session. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to the joys of clapping. As you all perhaps might know, we have a lot of nerve endings. So when we applaud others, we also give joy to ourselves. So let's not be stingy with that applause. A very warm welcome to all the esteemed panelists. And with that, I now hand it over to the moderator of this session.
Thanks a lot. I know many of you might be thinking like, why this guy is continuously on stage, right? So one of the reasons is that actually I do like the limelight. And I'm not from the trade, so it's easy to be non-partial, and hence I'm here. But today this session is very important for multiple reasons. One reason is that actually the policy and regulation in the previous panel also, when we were talking about pulses, we found that the policies are a very critical part of any value chain, and more importantly in agriculture, because you are having so many different types of stakeholders. You are having farmers on one side, you are having consumer on the side, and then there is a new term which has also been discussed, which is called political economics, right? We live in a democracy, and at the end of the day, our government need to survive to change policy or make policies. And hence, they have to take care of multiple stakeholders. For a country like India, which is having 130 million farmers, and we are having close to 1,400 million odd consumers, this balance becomes very critical. And who better than Sri Sirajji, who understand the dynamics, being secretary of multiple departments and someone who has been writing. Sir, I've been following the great work you are doing in writing and sharing your views openly. Sir, I would say that no faculty to understand or to ask a question to a person like you. So I would give a floor to you, sir, your initial views on the topic, sir.
So thank you very much for inviting me. One good thing you have done is that you did not send any questionnaire in advance. So we are totally unprepared. And hopefully we can be frank, since there is no agenda as such which was shared in advance. My initial thoughts are that in a vast country like ours, policy making is quite difficult. And unlike what you have heard from our politicians, the policy making largely remains similar across the governments, which means that all the governments, irrespective of the party in power, have to consider the interest of the consumer as a priority as compared to interest of the farmer. And therefore, all the governments would like inflation to remain low. While watching the debate in Parliament yesterday, I was reminded of similar debates between 2004 to 2009, when UPA was in power, and the major opposition used to come from the communist parties. At that time, most of the discussion on food inflation was spearheaded by the left parties. So discussion has unfortunately remained the same, and one reason for this is that India's food surpluses are very marginal. And therefore, from time to time, we may claim that we can feed the world and so on, but from time to time, we will continue to impose restrictions on export, use Essential Commodities Act, impose minimum export price, and so on. So I think the last point I would like to make is that the productivity has to rise substantially so that we can become a nation which can produce genuine surpluses year after year.
Excellent, sir. We all have this belief that eventually this is going to happen someday. Again, Shweta, coming to you, because I've seen you jointly also write a lot of articles, and you have been really doing great work. And when I read something what you write, you go very deep with a lot of economical data around it and extensive research on it. Being someone who has been, I would say, seeing this sector so closely, what sir said actually, politician would like to play towards the consumers. But end of the day, this is you're trying to inflate a balloon to the level where actually it's going to burst. And I'm seeing that happening sooner than later, where recently, past 3 years, our number was we had a wheat crop, which is sub 100 million tons. And that's why you are having all sort of problems, right? The government is not in position to do the OMSs, even when the prices are has breached 32 in Delhi. Your views on that are, how do we see that the policy can at least be a little bit more balanced and ensure that our farmers, they are incentivized to grow more?
Thank you. Thank you, Deepak ji, for this invitation. I was planning to say something else, but now I'll take a cue from you. As part of a work in my previous organization, together with the OECD, we had undertaken an analysis for 20 years, where we studied about 19 agriculture commodities, which were representing 70% of Indian agriculture. What we found was that over the span of 20 years, the farmers effectively were net taxed in India. Now, if we were to break the kind of support that is offered by any country to their farmers, there are three larger components. The support they give on the output price side, the support they give on the input side, and all others, like unconditional cash transfer. So what we assessed, at least when we deduced all the data together, was one, yes, there is a consumer bias in the policy that got established with the numbers. But second, we understand that by suppressing output prices because of the consumer bias in policies, we see a lot of incentives that the government was giving from the budgetary side of it. So how we see it is that while you are pulling back on the output prices, you're increasing the allotment via input subsidies and other supports that you were giving. But net impact was still taxation. So clearly the government in India has been finding ways of supporting the farmers when, on the other hand, it has continued to have the consumers stay on top of the policy environment. But one thing that we recognize is, and the last 2 to 3 years is a testimony, is that the commodity cycles, we see a period when there is a bumper production, government sets into action, the acreages fall, and then next period we have everything incentivized to the farmer by increasing MSP, by increasing procurement that year, and then the acreages come up. But this is something, as Siraj sir has also said, we've been seeing it more fiercely in commodities like onions, but now also in oilseeds and pulses. So for example, we started with the oilseed mission where they encouraged the MSP so much that they wanted the mustard farmer to produce, for example, much. They did produce bumper, but what happened? The prices fell much below the MSP. Who came to the rescue? Again, the government came to the rescue by pulling out 2 million tons from the market. So clearly we see a lot of policy shifting forward and backwards. We see, but consumers will continue to stay center stage. The recent MPC, monthly per capita expenditure data, also corroborates the fact that we are still more than 45% of an average Indian household budget is spent on food. Most of the farmers, 86% to 89%, whichever data we look at, still have land ownership of less than 2 hectares. These are very tiny land holdings, and therefore we see that many farmers are self-subsistence, they are producing for themselves. But clearly the policies have been moving forward and backwards. That's also because climate change has been fierce. That's also because prices rise do create panic in the government. And that's one lever I see gets most of the governments to react. Thank you.
No, perfect. So now I will come to you, Arvind. Like, you have been working globally on, the nutrition part of it. See, unfortunately, when we talk about food security, we miss out on a very vital part, the nutrition part of it, right? We are. Yeah. So we are always talking about, ensuring the carbs are given to the people. But are we in position going forward with the way we are doing agriculture to ensure that nutrition security as well? And you've been working on various projects on fortification, and again, I would like to learn from you that we also try to tinker a lot of things, like in India we have fortified rice, which are actually the extruded kernels, or the golden rice, which has happened in Philippines. Your overall views on that, how do we ensure the nutrition security, not just the food security?
Thank you, GrainsWorld, and thank you for having me on this panel. I've been echoing Siraj. I was expecting some questions before, but I think it's good to hear the panelists in the morning as well. World Food Program is the largest humanitarian agency of the United Nations. We are very uniquely placed because, both on the supply side as well as on the demand side. Just to give you a perspective, we reached around 152 million people through food assistance in 2023. We procured more than 3 million tons of food items in 2023. So how the global commodity prices, food prices fluctuate or move around, and also impacts the food security situation globally as well. And just to give you some statistics, more than 2 billion people in the world suffer from micronutrient deficiencies, what we also call it as hidden hunger. And also cereals and pulses form an important element of the dietary patterns for particularly lower and middle income countries as well. What particularly impacts is that the trade between countries, is very skewed in terms of, when you look at just in Asia Pacific region as well, we have countries which have surplus, we have countries which are perpetually deficient, which are sometimes deficient, sometimes sufficient, which are sufficient in one commodity or not sufficient in another commodities as well. That's where the role of policy and regulations becomes very important. Now, from a national perspective, when we are listening to speakers as well, the whole outlook being in terms of how we ensure the food security at the national level as well. But there is an element and a regional and a global angle as well, because probably the kind of fiscal space or the policy strength a country like India with its economic development potential has, the other smaller countries might not necessarily have that kind of a fiscal space to move forward as well. So that's where the role of policy and regulations, particularly in ensuring trade of goods, also ensuring food security, trying to address price volatility, which indirectly will lead to your food security and nutrition, because 70% of the calorie intake in some of the countries, comes from rice as the staple diet as well. And so if that is not being handled properly at a regional level, we are in for a big shock, because then responses will accordingly be quite shaky as well at the regional level as well. So it's important to also look at, one is how we can influence national policies, but also look at the role of regional bodies like ASEAN, SAARC, and in Africa like ECOWAS, because I understand that there is the World Trade Organization, you have those larger global bodies as well, but there's a lot that can happen regionally as well through regional bodies that we can engage in. Just to give you an example, we as World Food Program are currently engaging with, there's something called in Bangkok where I'm based, is the ASEAN +3 Emergency Rice Reserve. which is managed by the ASEAN countries as well. We are trying to see how we can ensure nutrition and food security through those grain reserves, which is managed by ASEAN, plus 3 countries, which is China, Japan, and South Korea as well. So there are many ways and approaches in which we can influence policies and regulations to ensure that both on the demand side as well as on the supply side, we have some kind of a level playing field and utilize all the governance structures that are available as well.
Excellent. You mentioned ECOWAS. In fact, a couple of countries are dropping out of it very recently. In fact, I traveled to Africa a lot, sir, and the overall viewpoint there is that it is easier to import or export to Europe from Africa than within Africa, even after the CFTA. So that's a challenge. So Bimala, we will come to you, the person in the room actually who generally is not talked much. We talked about farmers, consumer, but sir, he's an exporter and a trader. So that is, we also wanted to have that perspective. The change in the policy definitely impact the importers and exporter. Sir, आपका view क्या है? What do you feel like, how the government policy, right, can be shaped specifically in the agriculture commodity field?
थैंक यू वेरी मच. पॉलिसी और रेगुलेशन का बहुत ज़रूरी है अपने एग्रीकल्चर में. क्यों? अभी आने वाले टाइम में जगह तो बढ़नी नहीं है, एग्रीकल्चर लैंड डे बाय डे कम हो रही है, तो इसमें अपने को यील्ड कैसे बढ़े, यील्ड बढ़ाना क्या है, उसके ऊपर में गवर्नमेंट को एक पॉलिसी लानी चाहिए कि यील्ड को इंक्रीज कैसे कर सकते हैं. पॉपुलेशन अपनी बढ़ रही है और पॉलिसी का जो आपने येलो पीस में बताया, येलो पीस 70 रुपया से आकर के 30 रुपया अभी फार्मर को मिल रहा है, तो फार्मर के एंड में और कंज्यूमर दोनों के बेनिफिट के लिए पॉलिसी का बहुत वाइटल रोल है. और फूड सिक्योरिटी करने के लिए अपने को यील्ड बढ़ानी जरूरी है. सेकंड, अभी एक्सपोर्ट में अपन डिफिसिट जा रहे हैं, वीट एक्सपोर्ट बंद है, सब एक्सपोर्ट बंद है, तो एज ए एक्सपोर्टर हम लोग थोड़े परेशान हैं कि भाई एक्सपोर्ट नहीं है. लेकिन पहले तो अपने खाने का रखेंगे तब दूसरे को देंगे, अपने देश में पहले खाना मिलेगा तब दूसरे को देंगे. इसमें अभी मक्के के लिए लास्ट सेशन में बात हो रही थी, इथनॉल की वजह से काफ़ी फार्मर मक्के में हो गए हैं और आने वाले टाइम में अपने को वीट में भी प्रॉब्लम लग सकती है, जो ऑलरेडी अभी अपन फेस कर रहे हैं. वीट के प्राइसेस वेरी हाई कंपेयर टू इंटरनेशनल मार्केट. तो नेक्स्ट सीजन के लिए अपने यहाँ एक वीट बड़ा चैलेंज रहेगा. पल्सेस नो डाउट अपने यहाँ चैलेंज है, उसको अपन कैसे ग्रो कर सकते हैं, किस तरह यील्ड बढ़ा सकते हैं, फार्मर को कैसे प्रोत्साहन दे सकते हैं, वो गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से कोई भी पॉलिसी और रेगुलेशन इस मैटर में आना चाहिए कि अपनी यील्ड बढ़े. ये मेजर है. इंपोर्ट एक्सपोर्ट तो अपने यहाँ जैसे प्याज का बताए, प्याज अपने यहाँ अगर रेट ज़्यादा है तो अपने को उसमें एक्सपोर्ट ड्यूटी या कुछ लगाना ही पड़ेगा, पहले अपने खाने के लिए रखना पड़ेगा. तो टाइम टू टाइम पॉलिसी और रेगुलेशन, इसका एग्रीकल्चर के ऊपर में बहुत वाइटल रोल है और इसको थोड़ा फास्ट डिसीजन लेके भी गवर्नमेंट को ध्यान में रखना चाहिए. क्या हो रहा है उसको फास्ट डिसीजन लेके. थैंक यू वेरी मच.
Perfect. Sir, actually, I'll come back to you, Siraj sir. Even when I sit, what India should be doing in policy, one thing came to my mind is that there are 3 words. And all of those 3 words are productivity, productivity, productivity. But end of the day, I think sufficiently, because of whatever policy we make, we don't enable private investment in agriculture. If, for example, sir, I invest and come out with great seed, there is seed bill pending since 2004. My IP is not protected. In case I want to make my system more efficient, invest in processing, then actually suddenly government will ban export of rice, my investment goes dead. So how do we see that actually in such a volatile policy environment, we will be able to even achieve, because it's not scientific, it is also policy driven. Your views on, sir, how our policy can impact productivity?
Actually, you are right. The policies in the agriculture sector are quite unpredictable and they change too frequently, which impacts private investment in agriculture and food processing. In fact, 2 years back, when the government banned the export of wheat, I wrote in support of that. Later on, they banned the government of India banned the export of wheat products, which means maida, semolina, wheat flour, etc. I wrote against it because the total quantity of wheat flour which was being exported, wheat products which were being exported, was just about 200,000 tons. And in the process, the Indian companies which had set up businesses, export businesses of wheat products like ITC, etc. They lost business, and exports from India continue to remain banned. They are now importing wheat from Australia, etc. into Dubai. They have set up flour mills in Dubai. And from Dubai, they are feeding the NRIs in Singapore, US, Europe, etc. While we appreciate that the government policies are unpredictable, in fact, an effort was made in the Essential Commodities Amendment Act, which was brought by the government in 2020, which sort of provided for a predictable policy regarding the imposition of Essential Commodities Act, that it will be imposed only if the retail price of a commodity rises by more than 50% as compared to the average in the last 1 year or average in the last 3 years. So it wanted to make it predictable. But while the ordinance was imposed, promulgated in June, the government of India used the instrument of MEP, and it was not even placed before Parliament that the onion exports in 2020, etc. were restricted. So, as he was saying, whatever we may say about the need for stable policies, etc., farmers' interest, as Shweta says, OECD study, Indian farmers are net taxed, etc. But it will be very difficult for the government to say that it will do nothing to check the price rise. Now, when should the government intervene? That is a question, which is what the Essential Commodities Act provided, that you will not intervene if the price rise is less than 50%. Now, whether we agree with that proposition, we do not agree, of course it was withdrawn. And since then, the government has used Essential Commodities Act so many times that it is difficult to keep count. So the bottom line is that unless we produce genuine surpluses, as he was mentioning, which are predictable, which are large, and which are not impacted by climate change, not impacted by year-to-year fluctuations. A very good example is sugar. There are two commodities in which everyone thought that we are genuinely surplus. One is sugar, the other is rice. And we have seen that even the rice export was banned, and now even the export of sugar is not allowed. So, even in case of two commodities in which we thought that we have become surplus, we will always be exporting, we are not there. Of course, one reason is ethanol, but here is ethanol expert, so I leave it to her.
No, that's a very right point, sir, actually. So, Shweta, actually from you, I would like to understand, see, this whole pro-farmer, right, intention of the government gets defeated when suddenly, because of your aggressive plan to blend ethanol in your fuel, right, leads to people shifting to maize, ethanol through maize, and then DDGS kills your soya meal and eventually make your farmers suffer like anything. See, it's like, I would say that a chaos which was created this year, because of these numbers, the soya farmers are suffering just because of the ethanol policy of the government, period. Nothing more, nothing less. Your views going forward, if we keep on continuing, and because it's sir, consumer ko bhi fayda nahi uske andar. There is no benefit. I'm blended bhi mere ko 103, 104 mein hi mil raha hai. So as a consumer, I'm not gaining. And then actually I've distorted completely the value chain of soya bean. And if we continue doing that, maybe 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the line, you might have your soya production coming to 50%. And again, we'll say that import more edible oil. So that's not making sense to me. Your views on that, ma'am.
Thank you. I'll start by quoting one of the studies we'd released 2 years back, where we found that if the government of India wanted to fulfill, and they have been very successfully fulfilling their targets very closely on ethanol blending, the country for meeting the annual E20 requirement will need an area, a gross cropped area of about 7.1 million hectares. That, according to our estimates, was the gross cropped area of a Bihar state. So in order for the country to produce on its own the ethanol required for fuel blending with 20%, the country has to be ready to be able to dedicate 7.1 million hectares. Having said this, one thing that I've learned, and we are all learning, I mean, I understand that even government, even outside people, everybody in the value chain of fuel blending is learning because so many things are new. When we started studying ethanol blending, DDGS was never considered to be that big an issue. But as we came in the current year, we realized that DDGS is important. When just a year back, when we were talking to distillers, and they would say that the DDGS produced from maize and rice from India will have aflatoxin, because of which it won't get absorbed in the country. The rate of absorption we studied was not more than 5 to 7%. Today, that extent of absorption goes up to 25%. So what I sense is that this food, feed, and fuel nexus is much deeper than many of us comprehend. Let alone this, India never exported close to 1 million ton of maize ever in the last 10 years. We've done that this year. If maize, even if maize continues to be 40, 42, maize imports. So maize imports by India in the last 1 year is close to about 1 million tons, and that's not happened in the last 10 years. And that is a very big deal for a country where just 2 years back, maize farmer was suffering. Now the question on what you say, see, it's again the maize farmer is earning, the soybean farmer is losing. But it is a cusp in situation that even we as researchers are trying to understand. Just a few months back, we were told that soybean farmers, when the soybean crop came in, that the soybean farmers are suffering because DDGS is killing the meal market. Why doesn't the government increase the import duty? They increase the import duty and still soybean farmer continues to suffer. Then we were told that it is the soybean meal market that is actually driving, and rightly so. 80% of what we produce in terms of physical conversion of soybean is meal. Even in terms of revenue share, meal is greater. So of course we assess that. And now the thing is we need to increase probably the suggestion that is coming to the government and what we regularly hear is increase the export subsidies on soybean meal. Now, will that resolve the issue? No, because next year we need to be ready. E20 is the government's mandate. If E20 was created from, say, a diversion of 9 to 11 million tons of maize, we have to be ready that at least 6 million tons of DDGS will get produced next year. For sure, soybean meal is again going to suffer. We can already anticipate people are moving away from soybean. So in just support of the stakeholders involved, particularly government, we need to acknowledge the fact that this is newer field. Many of us are learning while the processes are going on. Because just a year back, even the industry didn't know that DDGS could create as much a damage. We are still talking with SOPA and we assess even they didn't know that such a damage could happen. So it is a market where we're evolving. We are understanding how feed, food, and fuel are getting interconnected, much more entrenched manner than we had anticipated. Just last year, more than 2 million tons of rice went for ethanol production, and the entire country was grappling with double-digit food inflation in rice. Rice was banned and still ethanol production happened. Now, these are the learnings that are on the table, but how this will play out, we need to be ready. The DDGS will come in. There has to be a system that has to align with it. Having said this, nutritional security and oilseed mission are critical. Therefore, I think the whole thing comes back to the government to strategically understand that we are losing land and that the land is moving towards fuel crops, and therefore strategically identify ways of possibly maybe looking at fallow land of the country which is growing too fast and maybe prioritize that for crops for fuel. Now, these are discussions on the table, and of course we can discuss.
So about 2 years back, we wrote a paper, Shweta, me, and another person, in which we said that this 45% of ethanol coming from grains, as per the Niti Aayog document, 45 from grains, 55 from sugar. We wrote that it is a bad policy choice.
Perfect, sir. So we are coming to the concluding part of this panel discussion. Sir, I'm having very strong views that actually when we could talk about food for fuel, I believe if it is coming from grain, ethanol is better in glass, not in car. Thank you.
Thank you for making it a very interesting discussion. So ladies and gentlemen, with that we conclude this panel discussion 2, which was entitled Policies and Regulations in Agriculture. May I now invite Ms. Ayati on stage to kindly present the mementos for this session. We are extremely thankful to our esteemed panelists, starting, of course, with the moderator himself, Mr. Deepak Parekh. And we start by thanking our honored guest and one of our panelists, Shri Siraj Hussain, former Secretary, Ministry of Food and Processing Industry and Agriculture, Government of India. It's been an honor and a privilege to have you here with us, sir. We take the pleasure of thanking Ms. Shweta Saini, founder and CEO, Arcus Policy Research. And a very green thanks to Mr. Bimal Bengani. Thank you. And of course, very green thank you to Mr. Arvind Bettigeri. Thank you, Ms. Ayati, for joining us on stage. May I request you all to please join us front and center for a group photo.